You know what? Sometimes I watch the news and I think I'm losing my mind. But then something happens that's so perfectly absurd, so beautifully revealing that I remember why I do this job. Because folks, what happened this week wasn't just news. It was a masterclass in how modern politics actually works when nobody's paying attention. Picture this. It's Tuesday morning, I'm sitting in my office with my usual breakfast of existential dread and black coffee, when suddenly every cable news network starts running the same breaking news banner. Trump considering removing Cash Patel as FBI director. 3 anonymous sources. Very official sounding. Very scary music in the background. Now, I've been doing this long enough to know that when a story has more anonymous sources than a WikiLeaks dump, you should probably check your skeptical pants are still on. But here's the thing that made my comedy writer brain start tingling. The language they used was practically wearing a tuxedo. They didn't say Trump was firing Cash Patel. Oh no, that would be too definitive. They said he was considering it. He may remove him. The White House was contending with unflattering headlines. It was like watching someone try to predict the weather by reading tea leaves while blindfolded. But here's where it gets beautiful, and I mean Beethoven's Ninth Symphony beautiful. Within 4 hours, this entire narrative collapsed faster than my self-esteem after reading Twitter comments. Trump gets on Air Force One. Reporter asks him directly, "Are you planning to replace Cash Patel?" And Trump's response, "No, he's doing a good job." Then boom, photo op in the Oval Office, press secretary statement, the whole 9 yards. It was like watching a house of cards get demolished by a sneeze. Now, you might think this is just another day in Crazy Town America, but hold on to your suspenders because this is where J.D. Vance enters our little drama. And what he said next, well, it's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if we're all living in some elaborate social experiment designed by aliens with a really twisted sense of humor. A fraud case out of Minnesota that's so outrageous, so perfectly emblematic of everything that's broken that I almost couldn't believe it was real. A couple starts a healthcare company. But here's the kicker. They run it out of a mailbox, like something you rent at one of those shipping centers next to a Subway and a nail salon. From this mailbox, they managed to steal over $7 million through fake Medicaid claims. They billed for patients who didn't exist, services that were never provided, and then spent the money on designer purses and luxury cars. It's like if Ocean's 11 was written by someone who really sucked at crime. Now, you'd think when they got caught, when a jury looked at the evidence and said, yeah, this is obviously fraud, after just 4 hours of deliberation, that would be the end of it, right? Wrong, because this is America in 2025, where even the most obvious conclusions can be overturned by one person who apparently thinks reality is more like a suggestion. Judge Sarah West, and I want you to remember that name, looked at a unanimous jury verdict and said, nah, I disagree. She overturned the conviction because she thought there could be other reasonable explanations for running a fake healthcare company out of a mailbox and stealing $7 million. Other reasonable explanations. Let that marinate in your brain for a moment. What other reasonable explanations could there possibly be? Maybe they were just really bad at geography and thought a mailbox was a hospital. Maybe they were conducting some kind of avant-garde art project about the futility of American healthcare. One of the jurors said they were shocked. And frankly, so was I. Because apparently we now live in a world where a jury of your peers means absolutely nothing if one judge decides they know better than 12 people who actually looked at the evidence. And this is where J.D. Vance comes in with what might be the most brutally honest political statement I've heard all year. He didn't just talk about this case in isolation. He connected it to everything else that's falling apart while our political class obsesses over, well, everything except the things that actually affect real people's lives. But here's what made his response even more devastating: the timing. Because while he's laying out this systematic breakdown of domestic priorities, guess what's happening simultaneously? The Cash Patel story is imploding in real time. So you've got this perfect split-screen moment. On one side, a politician actually addressing real problems that affect real people. And on the other side, the media scrambling to explain why their anonymous source fever dream just evaporated. It's like watching someone perform emergency surgery while the hospital administration argues about cafeteria menu options. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect if it was scripted by the universe's most cynical comedy writer. And Vance didn't hold back. He basically asked the question that everyone's thinking, but nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. Why are we more passionate about conflicts thousands of miles away than we are about the systematic theft happening in our own backyard? Why does a fraud case involving 7 million stolen dollars get less attention than the latest anonymous rumor about personnel changes? He pointed out something that should be obvious but apparently isn't. We're spending more energy debating foreign conflicts than we are preventing American taxpayers from being robbed by people running fake companies out of mailboxes. The level of passion being directed toward overseas issues compared to domestic fraud, corruption, and incompetence is, in his words, absolutely bonkers. And you know what? He's right. It is bonkers. We live in a country where you can steal $7 million through obvious fraud, get convicted by a jury, and walk free because one judge thinks maybe there's some other explanation we haven't considered. Here's what really gets me about all this. The same media that spent 4 hours building a castle in the air about Cash Patel couldn't be bothered to spend 4 minutes explaining why a judge can just overturn a jury verdict because she feels like it. The same political establishment that can summon unlimited passion for conflicts on the other side of the world treats domestic fraud like a minor accounting error. Vance laid it out clearly. Housing prices that make buying a home feel like applying for a space mission. Healthcare costs that turn routine medical procedures into financial Russian roulette. A national debt that's so large economists need scientific notation to describe it properly. But wait, there's more. Because apparently some stolen money doesn't just disappear into luxury goods. Some of it ends up funding extremist groups overseas. So we've got American taxpayer money being stolen through domestic fraud and then sent abroad to fund the very kind of instability that creates the foreign policy crises everyone's so passionate about. It's like a really dark comedy sketch where the punchline is that we're accidentally funding our own problems while ignoring the systems that created them in the first place. You want to know what's really rich about all this? The speed difference. 4 hours to debunk a media rumor, 4 hours for a jury to convict obvious fraudsters. But how long has it taken to address housing affordability, healthcare costs, government accountability? We're going on decades for those. And here's another thing that's been eating at me, the audacity of it all. Think about the brass it takes to run a healthcare scam out of a mailbox and then have a judge say, well, maybe they had their reasons. Meanwhile, if you tried to claim a questionable business expense, the IRS would audit you faster than you can say suspicious activity report. The system has become so upside down that obvious criminals get the benefit of the doubt while regular people get treated like potential suspects for existing. We've created a world where stealing millions through government programs is somehow more forgivable than missing a tax payment by $50. But wait, it gets better because apparently the people running these fraud schemes aren't just buying fancy cars and designer handbags with your money, though they're definitely doing that too. Some of this stolen cash is actually making its way overseas to fund the exact kind of instability that creates the foreign policy headaches everyone's so obsessed with discussing. So we've got this beautiful circular system where American taxpayers fund their own international problems through domestic crime that goes unpunished by judges who think juries are just advisory committees. It's like a really expensive, really stupid version of performance art. The priorities are so backwards, it's almost artistic. We've created a system where anonymous sources can dominate news cycles, but unanimous juries can be ignored, where foreign conflicts generate endless analysis, but domestic fraud gets treated like a local interest story. And the beautiful irony? While the media was scrambling to explain why their Cash Patel story fell apart, J.D. Vance was demonstrating exactly the kind of clarity and honesty that made their speculation look even more ridiculous by comparison. This is what happens when the gap between what political leaders talk about and what regular people experience becomes so wide you could drive a truck full of stolen Medicaid money through it. People notice. They get tired of being told that obvious problems aren't actually problems or that the solutions are too complicated for their simple minds to understand. So here we are, living in a country where media rumors collapse faster than my attempts at sobriety during election season, where jury verdicts matter less than judicial feelings, and where political priorities are so misaligned with reality that pointing it out counts as a radical statement. But hey, at least we got some clarity this week. We learned that some stories aren't worth the bandwidth they're transmitted on. We learned that some judges think juries are more like suggestion boxes than decision makers. And we learned that sometimes the most shocking thing a politician can do is simply acknowledge what everyone can already see. The old playbook isn't working anymore. Anonymous sources and speculative reporting can't survive even one news cycle when they're built on nothing. The disconnect between Washington priorities and real-world problems has become too obvious to ignore. And increasingly, the people who remember how things used to work are demanding something better. You know what the really twisted part is? I keep thinking about that jury in Minnesota. 12 regular people who took time out of their lives, looked at the evidence, and did their civic duty. They probably thought they were participating in something meaningful, something that mattered, and then one judge basically told them their judgment was worthless. Imagine being one of those jurors. Imagine going home and trying to explain to your family why the fraudsters you convicted are walking free. How do you even process that? How do you maintain faith in a system that treats your careful deliberation like a rough draft? And here's the kicker. While that judge was busy overturning obvious fraud convictions, somewhere in Washington, very serious people were having very serious meetings about very serious foreign policy matters. The same system that can't protect $7 million of taxpayer money from mailbox fraudsters somehow thinks it's qualified to manage complex international relationships. It's like watching someone who can't figure out how to use a can opener trying to perform brain surgery. The competence gap is so vast, it's almost philosophical. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the chaos is the feature, not the bug. Because when everything feels broken, when obvious truths become controversial, when jury verdicts become suggestions, it's easier for the really big problems to hide in plain sight. Because at the end of the day, democracy isn't a spectator sport. Even if it sometimes feels like we're all trapped in some surreal political theater where the script keeps changing and nobody told the actors. The beautiful truth is that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply tell people what they can already see with their own eyes.